Silence swallowed the underground poker room. The air hung thick with cigar smoke and August heat so suffocating it felt like drowning while still breathing. Green felt tables stretched across the concrete basement beneath the city streets, cash scattered across them like confetti after a funeral, stacks of hundreds, thousands, more money than most people would see in 5 lifetimes. But nobody was counting anymore. Lucian Rossi knelt on concrete slick with blood. His suit cost $15,000. Imported Italian silk, tailored to his exact measurements, the kind of fabric that took 3 months to arrive from Milan. That suit was now soaked crimson. Saturated. The color spreading across his chest and shoulders like a living thing. His hands that had signed documents condemning 17 men to federal prison, hands that lieutenants kissed in respect, those hands trembled uselessly over the body of his 8-year-old son. Micah lay motionless on the cold floor. The car accident outside the warehouse had happened 3 minutes ago. 3 minutes. A drunk driver, they said. A moment of carelessness, 1 second of distraction, and Lucian's security team had scattered like roaches when the lights came on. 6 armed men, trained killers every one, stood frozen against the basement walls. Mouths open. Eyes wide. Utterly paralyzed by the sight of their untouchable boss brought to his knees by something no gun could stop. Marco and Nino, his most trusted lieutenants, men who had watched him build an empire from ashes and vengeance, could not move. Could not speak. Could not do anything but stare at the blood pooling beneath the boy's leg, spreading across the concrete like a dark river. The wound on Micah's inner thigh gaped open. A shard of glass from the car window had caught him clean. The bleeding would not stop. Call 911 now. The voice came from behind the frozen men, sharp and steady as a blade. Someone has to call 911 right now. A woman shoved past the guards. She was small, maybe 5'3", with dark hair pulled back so tightly it stretched the skin at her temples. Her face was hollowed by hunger, cheekbones too sharp, jaw too defined, the kind of thinness that came from choosing between eating and paying rent. She wore a stained gas station attendant shirt, the name tag hanging crooked and faded. Her jeans had a rip at the knee, and her shoes, cheap canvas sneakers held together with duct tape, slapped against the concrete as she dropped beside the boy. Her hands moved with absolute purpose. She rolled her own jacket into a makeshift tourniquet and pressed it hard against the wound. Blood soaked through immediately. She did not flinch. Did not hesitate. She tilted the boy's head back, checked his airway, positioned him on his side so he would not choke if he vomited. Her fingers, calloused and trembling, moved with the practiced confidence of someone who had learned CPR from a free class at a homeless shelter and studied the pamphlets until the words burned into her memory. Compressions now, she said to no one in particular, and then she was doing them herself, her small hands pushing down on the child's chest in steady, measured rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Her voice came out like a prayer, like a command, like the only thing keeping all of them tethered to earth instead of falling into hell. Come on, baby. Come on. Stay with me. Stay with me. Lucian stared at this woman. This woman with hollow cheeks and trembling hands and a gas station uniform. This woman who pushed past 6 armed men without fear. This woman who knelt beside a dying child who meant nothing to her and moved like she was fighting for her own life. For the first time in 15 years, since the night his father was murdered in front of him when he was only 16, Lucian Rossi felt something crack inside his chest. The wail of sirens cut through the August night. Red lights flooded the basement. Paramedics in blue uniforms thundered down the stairs, and the woman stepped back without being asked, her hand still trembling, her shirt now stained with blood that was not hers. Micah gasped. A shallow, fragile sound, but a sound. His eyes flickered open. His breathing, the woman whispered. His breathing. But what she did not know was that the dying boy she had cradled in her hands belonged to the most powerful Mafia boss in New York. That the blood soaking her uniform came from the child of a man whose empire was built on vengeance and control. That the night she chose mercy over survival would rewrite her entire world. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming tomorrow. Now let us go back to the beginning to discover how this homeless woman with $2 in her pocket ended up in an underground poker room at all. 12 hours earlier, at 6:33 in the morning, Allara Voss woke in the front seat of her 2008 Honda Civic. The windows were fogged with condensation. She could not see outside. She could only feel the suffocating closeness of the car, the stale air thick with the smell of old coffee and unwashed clothes, and the particular smell of people who sleep in vehicles, a mix of human breath and resignation and time running out. She lay very still for a moment, her eyes closed, counting her heartbeats before she was ready to face another day. Her son Micah was curled in the back seat, his 7-year-old body folded into a shape that should not have been possible. His breathing was shallow. It had always been shallow, but in the last 3 weeks it had become worse. More labored. More frightening. Allara sat up slowly, her neck screaming in protest. The car's interior temperature had dropped to 48 degrees overnight. She could see her own breath misting in the cold. She reached back and pulled a blanket, a thin thing that cost $9 at a thrift store 2 years ago, over her sleeping son's shoulders. Then she opened the glove compartment and took out her wallet. $2. A $5 bill and 3 ones, minus $4 from yesterday when she bought her son his favorite crackers, the ones shaped like fish, the ones that made him smile. $2 remained. $2 in American currency between her family and complete financial collapse. She pulled out the eviction notice from the manila folder wedged under the front seat. Red ink. Bold letters. Legal language she had read so many times she could recite it in her sleep. 12 days. 12 days until the landlord changed the locks on the apartment where they had lived for 3 years. 12 days until she and her son had no place to sleep except this car, except the shelter on 5th and Morrison which only took women with medical documentation of disability, except the streets. The notice was dated August 19th. Today was August 23rd, 8 days left now. No, 7 days and 16 hours. She did not want to do the math. The math was a knife cutting through everything. Allara turned on the car's engine to get the heater going. She had maybe a quarter tank of gas. That would last through today if she was careful. Tomorrow was someone else's problem. She pulled out of the warehouse district parking lot where she had paid the attendant $5 to let her park overnight, and she drove toward the diner where she worked the breakfast and lunch shifts. The city was waking up. Yellow cabs honked. Delivery trucks double-parked themselves on sidewalks. People in expensive coats hurried toward subway stations, coffee cups in hand, their faces scrolled and worried and important. Nobody looked at the 2008 Honda with the cracked windshield and the bumper held on with duct tape. Nobody ever looked. The diner was called Brennan's Place, and it had been operating since 1987. The sign outside was vintage neon, the letters flickering and dying. Inside, the black and white checkered floor was chipped and worn. The smell of grease and burnt coffee hung permanent in the air like a fog that would never lift. Allara had worked there for 8 months. She clocked in at 7:15 a.m., tied her apron around her waist, and began setting up tables for the breakfast rush. Her feet hurt. Her back hurt. Her hands ached from washing dishes until 3 in the morning the night before. But she moved anyway, methodical and practiced, because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant acknowledging that her son's breathing was getting worse, that the hospital bill was coming, that the eviction notice was not a threat, it was a promise. Harold Brennan emerged from the back office at 7:45 a.m. He was a man of 62, with a belly that stretched his shirt and a gold pinky ring on each hand. His face was red, always red, like he was perpetually angry at the world for existing. He wore cheap cologne that smelled like a chemical factory, and his eyes tracked every movement his employees made with the kind of attention that only came from a need to find reasons to dock their pay. "You," he said, pointing at Allara. "Table 4, now." "They've been waiting." Table 4 had sat empty for the last 5 minutes. But Allara did not argue. She took her notepad and went to the table where 3 businessmen in suits were already flipping through menus. "Good morning," she said, pen poised. "What can I get you?" The oldest of the 3 looked up, and through her, she watched his eyes register her as a function, not a person. A service. A thing that should be efficient and invisible. Coffee. Black. And the eggs, over easy, hash browns crispy, and he turned to his companions. "What are we doing, gentlemen?" They ordered. She wrote. She did not exist for them except as the temporary absence she would fill when she returned with their food. The breakfast rush came and went. By 11 a.m., the diner had emptied except for 2 elderly women in the corner and a man in construction clothes sleeping against the window. Allara wiped tables. Her manager, a woman named Rita who had worked at Brennan's for 19 years, pulled her aside while they were alone. "He's in a mood today," Rita whispered, glancing toward the back office where Harold Brennan was counting cash at his desk. "Fired someone yesterday. Kid quit on the spot. Didn't take it." "Who?" Allara asked, though she knew the answer was irrelevant. People did not stay at Brennan's place. "Doesn't matter. He's looking for excuses. Be careful." At 2 p.m., Harold called her into the back office. The office was small and windowless, smelling of stale cigarettes even though smoking had been banned inside for years. Harold sat behind a desk covered in receipts and invoices. A safe sat in the corner, black and heavy and locked. "How much did you make in tips yesterday?" he asked without looking up. $23, Allara said. She had made $17.50. She knew the difference because it mattered. Every dollar mattered. Harold's eyes moved up to her face, and they were cold. "Predatory. That doesn't sound right. I watched you. You made at least 35. No, You're stealing from me." The words dropped into the silence like stones. "I'm not stealing. I wrote down what I made." Harold stood up. He was tall, well over 6 feet, and he used the height like a weapon. He moved closer to her, close enough that she could smell the bourbon on his breath even though it was only 2 p.m. Close enough that she could see the small blood vessels in the whites of his eyes. "You know what happens to people who steal from me." His voice was quiet. "Dangerous. People disappear in this city all the time. Especially people who shouldn't be here in the first place. Especially people with no documentation. Especially mothers with sick children." Allara's blood turned to ice. She had never told Harold about Micah. She had never mentioned the hospital, the tests, the diagnosis that was sitting like a landmine inside her chest, waiting to explode. "How do you?" "I know everything about the people who work for me. And what I know is that you're in this country illegally, and you have a child, and that child is about to need very expensive medical care. How would you pay for that, Allara? With your tips? With your wages?" He laughed. A sound like breaking glass. "You have nowhere to go but down from here. You understand that? The only reason you're still working is because I allow it. The only reason your son isn't in a government facility right now is because you've been useful. So you will not steal from me. You will not lie to me. And you will understand that I own you." He sat back down at his desk. "Now get out. You're done for the day. Be back at 5 a.m. tomorrow." Allara left the office with her hands shaking. Outside, the afternoon heat was suffocating. 94 degrees. The kind of heat that made the sidewalk soft. She walked 3 blocks to a gas station and bought a hot dog she could not afford and ate it standing in an alley, her back against the brick wall, tasting nothing. Her phone buzzed. A text from the Children's Hospital, reminder of your appointment tomorrow at 11 a.m. Cardiology specialist. Bring all previous test results. She did not have $300,000. She had 8 days before she and her son were homeless. She had one son whose heart was slowly failing. She had a manager who knew her secret and had made it clear he would use it to destroy her if she did not comply. She had $2 in her wallet. The afternoon stretched ahead of her like a sentence with no ending in sight. The hospital hallway stretched in both directions like a tunnel with no exit, fluorescent lights humming their endless song, and Allara Voss sat motionless on a plastic chair that squeaked when she shifted her weight, holding a piece of paper that had just become her entire future. The number printed in black ink seemed to grow larger every time she looked at it. $300,000. Her hands trembled as she read it again. $300,000 for a surgery her 7-year-old son needed within 10 days, or his heart would fail completely, and she would lose him the way she had lost everything else. She had $2 in her wallet. 2. The cardiologist had already left the room. Dr. Patterson, a woman with kind eyes and the exhausted expression of someone who delivered impossible news every single day, had explained the valve replacement procedure with diagrams and statistics and compassion, but what Allara heard was only this: your son is dying, and you cannot save him. The words repeated in her head like a curse. Dying. Cannot save. Dying. Cannot save. In the corner of the waiting room, Micah sat coloring on scrap paper someone had given him, his small tongue poking out slightly as he concentrated on staying inside the lines. He had no idea. The collapse in the diner 2 hours ago had terrified him, but children forget quickly. Already he had moved past the fear into the simple present tense of being alive, of having a pencil and paper, of existing in this moment. He did not know that his mother was sitting 15 feet away calculating how many shifts it would take to earn $300,000. Approximately 12,000 shifts. At 8 hours each, that was 96,000 hours of work. That was 11 years of 40-hour weeks with no days off, no sleep, no time to exist as anything other than a working body. The hospital bill trembled in her hands. Outside the window, the late afternoon sun was already beginning its descent, and Allara knew she needed to get Micah somewhere safe before the warehouse district filled with the kind of darkness that made mothers hold their children tighter. She folded the bill carefully into her pocket, next to the 2 crumpled dollar bills and the eviction notice that had arrived 3 days ago with red ink screaming across the front, final notice. 12 days remaining. Your property will be seized. 12 days until the 2008 Honda Civic parked 6 blocks away, the only shelter she and Micah had left, would be towed by the city. 12 days until they were completely homeless. And now 10 days until Micah's surgery, which she could not afford, which she could never afford, which might as well be on another planet given the distance between her and $300,000. She stood and walked to where Micah was coloring. Come on, sweetheart. We have to go. He looked up, his eyes bright and trusting. Did the doctor say my heart is okay now? She did not answer. Instead she took his small hand in hers, feeling how warm it was, how alive it was, how desperately it was still beating despite the defect running through its chambers like a secret sabotage. Come on, she whispered, and they left the hospital together. The bus ride back to the warehouse district took 47 minutes. Allara counted every single one, watching the city transform from the gleaming downtown where hospitals and office towers reached toward the sky, to the industrial neighborhoods where the buildings grew shorter and older, where the streets grew wider and emptier. They got off at the stop 3 blocks from the parking lot where her Honda waited like a loyal dog that did not yet know it was about to be abandoned. The evening heat had not broken. Even at 6 o'clock, the temperature clung to the asphalt and the buildings, making everything shimmer like a mirage. Allara and Micah walked slowly, her hand steady in his, her mind already spinning through impossible calculations. She could ask for an advance on her pay. Harold Brennan would never give it to her. She could go to a bank. No bank would loan money to someone with no address, no credit history, no papers. She could call the school, perhaps they had resources. They had already stretched kindness to its limit by allowing her to list a friend's address as Micah's residence. The only other thing she could do was the thing she had already tried, the thing that had failed every single time: she could pray. She did not pray. They reached the Honda at 6:32 in the evening, and Allara unlocked it with a key that felt heavier than it should. The interior was already heating up again, the temperature inside already climbing toward unbearable. She opened all 4 doors to let the air circulate, then helped Micah into the back seat where they kept a small cooler with bottled water and the few belongings that constituted their entire life. A change of clothes. A pillow that had once belonged to her mother. A blanket with a thread coming loose at one corner. She found the gallon jug they kept for emergencies and poured water into Micah's cup, watching him drink greedily, watching his small throat work as he swallowed. His lips were still slightly pale from the collapse at the diner. She knew the signs now, the faint bluish tint to his fingernails, the way he tired more quickly than other children, the small gesture he made sometimes of touching his chest as if he could feel the broken valve working against him. "Mama, I'm tired," he said, though the sun had not yet fully set. "I know, baby. Come here." She lay down beside him on the back seat, the vinyl hot against her skin even through her clothes, and pulled him close. His head rested on her arm, and within minutes he was asleep, his breathing steady and even, each inhale and exhale a small miracle that he was still here, still alive, still beating. She lay awake in the dying light, counting the hours until morning, knowing that tomorrow she would have to return to Harold's diner, that she would have to smile and serve and pretend that her world had not just collapsed completely. At 6:44 a.m. the following morning, the sun had not yet cleared the warehouse roofs, but the humidity was already so thick that breathing felt like drowning. Allara woke in the back seat with Micah still pressed against her, their bodies creating a small pocket of heat inside the Honda. She untangled herself carefully, trying not to wake him, and found her phone under the pile of clean clothes they used as pillows. 12 missed calls. 8 text messages. All from Harold Brennan at the diner. "Where are you? You're late. You better not be taking a personal day. Your shift started 40 minutes ago." She checked the time. 6:46 a.m. Her shift at the diner began at 7, and it took 20 minutes to walk there if she moved quickly. She had maybe 8 minutes to wake Micah, get him cleaned up enough to be presentable at school, and walk him to the bus stop that served the school 3 miles away, using her friend's address. Then she would need to run to the diner to avoid another confrontation with Harold. She grabbed a bottle of water and a washcloth from the small bag they kept accessible, and gently woke Micah. "Come on, sweetheart. We need to get ready." She wiped his face clean, changed him into the second shirt they had, the one without the stain from yesterday's accident, and combed his hair with her fingers, trying to make him look like a child who slept in a real bed, who had a real home, who had a mother who could afford to buy him breakfast. They walked to the bus stop with 3 minutes to spare. Micah climbed aboard the yellow school bus, his small backpack on his shoulders, his lunch box containing 2 peanut butter sandwiches she had made from discount bread. She watched him find a seat by the window, watched him wave at her as the bus pulled away, and then she turned and started running toward Harold's diner. She made it there in 19 minutes, her shirt already soaked through with sweat, her heart pounding from exertion and dread. Harold was waiting for her at the door, arms crossed, his face already twisted into the expression of disgust he wore specifically for her. He was 42 years old, with dark hair slicked back with product that made it shine, a gold watch on his wrist that probably cost more than everything Allara owned, and a reputation among the diner staff for being absolutely ruthless. "You're late," he said, not moving from the doorway. "I'm sorry. I had to." "I don't care what you had to do. You're here to work. Not to make excuses." He stepped aside to let her pass, and she could smell his cologne mixed with coffee and something underneath that smelled like anger. "You're on tables 7 through 12. And don't think I didn't notice you pocketing tips yesterday. I know exactly how much you made. Don't try it again." She had not pocketed any tips. She had earned exactly $98.30 yesterday, and Harold had given her $47, telling her he was taking the rest for breakage until shortage, terms she did not understand because there had been no breakage and no till shortage. She had learned not to argue. Every time she argued, something worse happened. Her schedule got cut. Her section got the rudest customers. Once, he had made her stay 3 hours past her shift to clean the grease traps as punishment for asking why he had shorted her $70. The morning shift blurred into the afternoon shift without a break. She worked from 7 a.m. until 6 p.m., with only a 30-minute lunch period where she sat in the back alley behind the diner and ate the employee meal, usually leftover soup or a sandwich made from yesterday's meat. Her feet ached. Her lower back was screaming. She had earned approximately $114, and she knew Harold would give her maybe 50 or 60 of it, the rest disappearing into his pocket through his various fees. At 4:30 in the afternoon, Harold called her into his office. It was a small room with a desk that held stacks of invoices, a filing cabinet that looked like it had not been opened in years, and a single window facing the alley. He was sitting behind the desk, and he did not ask her to sit. "Close the door," he said. She closed it. Her stomach was already tightening. "I've been thinking about your situation. About how you're an illegal immigrant working without proper documentation, about how your son is in school under a false address, about how you're living in your car in a city parking lot." He smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made her want to step backward. "I'm wondering what would happen if I made one phone call to immigration. Just one. I have the contact of an ICE officer I went to high school with. Really nice guy. I'm sure he'd be very interested to hear about you." Her hand started shaking. "Please. I haven't done anything wrong. I just need to work. I need to take care of my son. I know exactly what you need." He leaned back in his chair, his gold watch catching the light. "You need a job that pays, and you need to keep that job, and you need me to not make that phone call. Is that right?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Good. Then here's what's going to happen. You're going to continue working for me, and you're going to continue being grateful for the opportunity. You're going to stop complaining about your pay. You're going to stop telling anyone about your living situation. And you're going to remember that the only thing standing between you and total destruction is my goodwill. Do you understand?" "Yes," she whispered. "I'm sorry, I didn't hear you." "Yes. I understand." He stood and walked to the door, placing his hand on the small of her back in a way that made her skin crawl. "Good girl. Now get back to work. You've got 3 more hours on your shift, and I expect every table to be happy when you leave." She left the office without looking at him, her entire body shaking with rage and helplessness. In the break room, she looked at herself in the small mirror hanging above the sink. A woman in her late 20s stared back at her, but her eyes belonged to someone much older. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail that had begun coming loose hours ago. She had a small bruise on her arm from where she had bumped into a shelf reaching for plates. She was nobody. Just a woman without papers, without a home, without a future, without any way to save her son's life. She turned on the cold water and splashed her face, trying to compose herself. 3 more hours. She could do 3 more hours. At 7:15 p.m., when her shift finally ended, Harold counted out her tips in front of her. $43. She had earned $124 in tips over the course of the day, and he was giving her $43. "The rest is for overhead," he said, seeing the look on her face. "You think the diner just runs itself? You think those tables clean themselves? You're lucky I'm as generous as I am." She took the $43 and added it to the $2 she already had. $45. That would buy gas to get to the hospital tomorrow if Micah needed to go. That would buy food for 2 days if she was careful. That would not buy a house. That would not save her son. She left the diner and walked toward the bus stop, already knowing that she would need to pick Micah up from after-school care, which cost $15 a day that she could not afford. She had only been using it on days when there was absolutely no other option, but yesterday when he had collapsed, she had to keep him somewhere safe while she worked. $15. That left her $30 for the rest of the week. $30 to feed 2 people, to buy gas, to keep herself alive. Her phone buzzed. A text from the school. "Micah is being picked up by after-school care at 5:45 p.m. today. Care fee is $15 and must be paid by Friday or he will not be allowed to attend next week. She was moving through the world like someone underwater, each action requiring enormous effort. She caught the bus, rode it for 30 minutes to the after-school facility, and picked up Micah at 6 p.m. He was sitting on a bench outside, his backpack beside him, a volunteer watching him. "He's been wonderful all day," the volunteer said, though Allara could see the exhaustion in Micah's eyes, the slight tremor in his small frame that meant his heart had been working too hard. They rode the bus back to the warehouse district in silence. Micah fell asleep against her shoulder, and she sat there holding him, staring out the window at the city passing by, thinking about the $300,000 she did not have, the 10 days that were ticking away, the 12 days after that until the Honda was towed and they were completely homeless. They reached the car at 7:42 p.m. The temperature inside had climbed to 102 degrees. She opened all the doors to let it cool, and while Micah sat on the curb drinking water, she made a calculation on a piece of scrap paper she found in the glove compartment. Earnings per day, approximately $50 after Harold's theft. Days until surgery, 10. Total she could earn, $500. Total needed, $300,000. The math was not complicated. She could not do it. There was no equation that made sense, no calculation that led anywhere except toward failure. She looked at Micah, sitting on the curb in the cooling evening, drinking water under the sodium lights of the parking lot, and she felt something inside her chest break in a way that was deeper than bone. The hospital room held that particular silence that belongs to the small hours of morning, the kind of quiet that comes just before the world wakes, when monitors beep into emptiness and the fluorescent lights hum their constant, indifferent song. Allara Voss sat in a plastic chair beside the bed where young Micah Rossi slept, her body folded into itself like she was trying to take up as little space as possible, like she had spent so long being invisible that she had forgotten how to occupy a room. The child's chest rose and fell with the steady rhythm of sedation. And 4 line ran from his small arm to a bag of clear fluid. She had not moved in 4 hours. She was still covered in his blood, dried brown stains on her forearms, on the collar of her waitress uniform, in the creases of her palms. She had washed her hands twice in the bathroom sink, but the stains remained, and she found she could not bring herself to wash again. The blood felt like evidence of something that mattered. At 3:47 in the morning, the door opened. Lucian Rossi entered the room, and the temperature seemed to drop, not from cold but from the weight of his presence, the way the air itself reorganized around him. He was still wearing the same charcoal suit he had worn in the underground room, the jacket open, white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, gold cufflinks catching the harsh light. A scar ran from his left temple to his cheekbone, a permanent record of violence. His eyes were the color of storm water, and they moved across the room methodically, first to his son, then to the monitors, then to Allara. When those eyes landed on her, something shifted. She felt it like a physical thing, a pressure against her chest. He pulled a chair beside hers and Saturday. Not close enough to threaten. Close enough to matter. "You should rest," he said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath, the kind of voice that gave orders and expected obedience. "There's a hotel across the street. I've arranged a room." Allara shook her head without looking at him. "I'm not leaving him. He's sedated. He won't wake for hours. It doesn't matter." Lucian studied her profile, the exhaustion carved into the line of her jaw, the dark circles that made her eyes look hollowed out, the tremor in her hands that she was trying to hide by gripping the chair seat. He had ordered men killed for less. He had burned down businesses, destroyed families, orchestrated things that would never leave a trail back to him. He had stared into the faces of terrified people and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. That was before. That was when his heart was a perfectly programmed machine, running on fuel that did not require warmth. "What's your son's name?" he asked. She turned to look at him then. "Micah. 7 years old. My son is Micah." He paused. 8 years old. Something flickered across her face, recognition, maybe. The coincidence of names shared between them, across the chasm that separated her world from his. He told the doctors what happened, Lucian continued. He said a lady came down from the sky and held him and told him to be brave. He described you in perfect detail. He said you had kind eyes. Allara felt something break inside her chest, something already fractured now splitting along new fault lines. She turned away from him, back to the sleeping child. You have nowhere else to be. Lucian asked it as a statement, not a question. She did not answer. That silence was an answer. How long? He pressed. Since April. 8 months. He absorbed this information like a man absorbing a physical blow. 8 months. His son slept in Egyptian cotton sheets in a penthouse overlooking Central Park. This woman's son slept in a 2008 Honda parked in the warehouse district where rats the size of cats moved through the darkness. The surgery, he said. When? 10 days. Within 10 days, or. She could not finish the sentence. Could not form the words that came after or. How much? $300,000. The number hung in the recycled air of the hospital room. To Lucian, $300,000 was what he spent on a suit, on a watch, on a single night's entertainment in a private club where men wagered fortunes on hands of cards. To Allara, it might as well have been 3 million, 3 billion. It was the distance between this world and any world she could reach. What's your son's condition? He asked. Congenital heart valve failure. The valve is deteriorating. The surgery is the only thing that will save his life. Lucian stood and walked to the window. Beyond the glass, New York City sprawled in darkness, billions of dollars in motion, millions of people sleeping in beds, in cars, on streets, each one carrying their own version of this weight. He pressed his hand against the cold glass. I will handle it, he said without turning around. You can't. I already am. He turned back to face her, and there was something in his expression that made her understand he was not offering her a choice in the matter. He was stating a fact. He was a man accustomed to reshaping reality according to his will. The door opened. Micah appeared in the doorway, his frame filling most of the space, his suit tailored to accommodate the width of his shoulders. His eyes moved from Lucian to Allara, and something registered there, a question, a surprise, a shift in the landscape of what he thought he understood. In 15 years of working for Lucian Rossi, Micah had never seen him sit beside anyone in silence. Had never seen him speak in that voice, the one that contained gentleness, which should have been impossible. The documents, Micah said quietly. Lucian nodded. Do it. Micah withdrew. The door closed with a soft, deliberate click. Allara's phone buzzed in her backpack. Once, then twice more in rapid succession. She did not reach for it. She watched Lucian sit back down beside her, and she saw in his face something that terrified her more than Harold Brennan's threats, more than the eviction notice with its red ink deadline, more than any of the ordinary horrors that had become the infrastructure of her survival. She saw that he intended to save her. She saw that he would move heaven and earth to do it, and that the earth would break before she could refuse him. Why? She whispered. Lucian did not answer immediately. He watched his son sleep. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than before, and the scar on his face seemed to deepen in the pale light. My father was a good man, he said. Honest. He ran his business by a code. I was 14 when they killed him. Rivals. Political enemies. It didn't matter who exactly, what mattered was that no one stopped them. Everyone stood frozen. Everyone waited for someone else to act. He paused. I learned that night that the world belongs to those willing to move when others freeze. That strength is not about having power. It's about using it when the moment demands it. When everyone else hesitates. He turned to look at her directly. You moved. While 6 armed men stood frozen, you moved. That is rarer than anything I have ever seen in this city. Allara's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs. I can't accept. It's already done, he said. 3 blocks away, in the luxury apartment above the diner on Fifth Avenue, Victoria Ashford sat in a leather chair drinking wine from a crystal glass, her silver hair pulled back from her face with a pearl clip worth more than Allara's car. She was scrolling through her phone, one manicured finger swiping through emails, when a text arrived from Harold Brennan. "She's disappeared. No one knows where she went." Victoria smiled. The smile was small and cold, like the smile of a predator that had caught the scent of prey. She texted back, "Send her address to the CPS hotline tomorrow morning. Anonymous tip. Say she's living in her vehicle with a sick child. Say you heard her telling a customer she couldn't afford medicine. By noon, the boy will be in protective custody. She'll lose him." She took another sip of wine. 53 years old and still beautiful because beauty required only discipline and money, both of which she had in abundance. She had destroyed 3 women before Allara. 3. Each one had been easy, a word in the right ear, a call to the right agency, a well-timed photograph. They had crumbled. They always crumbled. What Victoria did not know was that in the basement of a federal building in Manhattan, a man named Detective James Chen had just received a comprehensive file containing evidence of wage theft, human trafficking, endangerment of a minor, and systematic exploitation conducted across 7 restaurants and 2 hotels by Harold Brennan and Victoria Ashford. The file had been compiled by 3 of Lucian Ross's lawyers and hand-delivered by Micah to someone Lucian had known for a decade, someone who owed him favors that had never been called in. What Victoria did not know was that she had 3 weeks left before her life began to collapse. In the hospital room, Allara finally broke. The tears came suddenly, without warning, her whole body folding in on itself like a building coming down. Lucian did not move to comfort her. He simply sat in the darkness beside her, and that was enough. That was everything. Because for the first time in 8 months, she was not alone. In the hallway outside, Nino stood guard, and when Marco appeared beside him, they exchanged a look neither had words for. They had worked for Lucian Rossi long enough to recognize when something fundamental had shifted. They had seen him order executions with the tone of voice most people used to order coffee. They had never seen him like this, present, attentive, willing to sit in a hospital room at nearly 4 in the morning beside a woman who owned nothing and had been nothing to him 24 hours before. "He's going to burn the world for her," Nino whispered. Marco nodded slowly. "No," he said. "He's going to rebuild it. That's worse." Rain hammered against the Honda's windshield like fists demanding entry, and Allara Voss sat motionless in the driver's seat, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles had turned white as bone. The custody hearing notice lay on her lap, the letters swimming before her eyes: emergency hearing, tomorrow, 2 p.m., Child Protective Services, custody status review. Tomorrow they would take Micah. Tomorrow at 2 p.m., a woman in a government office would sign papers that would separate her from her son, the only thing in this world she had managed not to destroy, and she would have nothing left. She had tried. God knew she had tried. Double shifts at the diner, eating scraps from the garbage, sleeping in this car with the windows fogged from their breath, counting coins like they were diamonds, but it had never been enough. Harold had stolen her wages. Victoria had destroyed her reputation. And now they had taken her future. In the back seat, Micah coughed in his sleep, a small wet sound, and she heard him whisper her name. "Mama." She turned to look at him, this 7-year-old boy whose heart was failing and whose mother was failing him faster. His face was peaceful in sleep, unburdened by the knowledge that tomorrow everything would change. He did not know that the custody workers would find her unfit, that they would place him with strangers, that he would wake up in a room that smelled like institutional bleach instead of her perfume. Allara opened the car door. Rain soaked through her clothes instantly, cold and relentless, running down her neck and into the collar of the thin jacket she had worn for 3 years. She walked to the guardrail overlooking the East River, her feet moving on their own, her mind already somewhere distant and quiet. The water below churned black and fathomless, barely visible in the pre-dawn darkness, and she thought about how simple it would be to just stop. To stop fighting. To stop failing. To stop waking up terrified. Her reflection in the wet metal railing showed a stranger, a woman she no longer recognized, hollowed out by hunger and exhaustion, her eyes empty as abandoned houses. She had lost weight. Her skin had taken on a grey cast that no amount of sunlight could fix. She looked like a ghost that had already died but forgot to stop walking. She stood there for 3 minutes. Maybe 4. Time had become strange and slippery, unreliable. The rain fell harder, and she thought about Micah asking for her in the dark, thought about him crying in a foster care facility, thought about him forgetting the sound of her voice. 1 step. That was all it would take. 1 step forward, and from the back of the car, a small cough interrupted the sound of the rain. Then another. And then, so faint she almost missed it, his voice, "Mama?" She jerked away from the railing as if it had burned her. Her hands were shaking so violently she could barely grip the wet metal as she pulled herself back from the edge. She ran to the car, her feet splashing through puddles, and climbed into the back seat where her son was stirring, confused, his hand reaching for her in the darkness. "I'm here," she whispered, and she pulled him close, wrapping the blanket around both of them, and she made herself a promise in that moment. If they were going to take him from her, they would have to fight for him. And Allara Voss was tired of losing fights. She did not know that while she sat in that car, while she held her son and decided to stand up one more time, the machinery of Lucian Ross's empire was already moving. At 5 a.m., exactly 7 hours before the custody hearing, 12 men in federal tactical gear moved through the pre-dawn darkness like ghosts. Not Lucian's men. FBI. Federal Bureau of Investigation. But they were moving on intelligence that Lucian's lawyers had delivered 3 days ago to a detective named James Chen, someone who had owed Lucian favors for a decade and had finally been asked to call them in. Flashbangs exploded through Harold Brennan's apartment door at 5:13 a.m. The sound was percussive, violent, a controlled explosion designed to disorient. His neighbors in the luxury building on the Upper East Side woke to screaming and the thunder of boots on hardwood floors. Harold himself woke to agents' voices, to hands yanking him from his bed, to the reality that his crimes had finally caught up with him. He was dragged into the hallway in boxer shorts, his face the color of spoiled milk, his body trembling like a cornered animal that had just realized there was no escape. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly at first, then words spilled out in a desperate flood. Wait, there's been a mistake, I didn't do anything, you have the wrong person, this is insane, call my lawyer, call my... Federal Agent Morrison read him his rights in a voice that was professional and utterly unmoved by his pleading. Harold Brennan, you're under arrest for wage theft, extortion, fraud, violation of federal labor laws, and violation of the Fair Labor Standards Act. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The agents had briefcases full of evidence. Every pay stub that Harold had withheld. Every threatening message. Every instance of stolen tips documented and photographed. 7 years of exploitation laid out in meticulous detail. The charges they read him added up to 40 years in federal prison. No parole. No second chances. Just for decades inside a cell. At the exact same moment, in a penthouse on Park Avenue with a view that stretched across the entire city, Victoria Ashford woke to the sound of her apartment door being rammed off its hinges. She sat up in her four-poster bed, her silk robe draped across the mahogany furniture, confusion and fury blooming across her face in equal measure. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, but the words died in her throat when she saw the news cameras already positioned outside her building, the satellite trucks with their antennas extended toward the grey sky, the photographers crouched behind barriers with their lenses aimed upward like weapons. Someone had tipped every news station in the city. Someone had made certain that when Victoria Ashford walked out of her penthouse in handcuffs, every camera would be there to document the fall of a woman who had spent 20 years cultivating an image of charity, wealth, and untouchable social standing. The FBI agent who placed the cuffs on her wrists was a woman, which somehow made it worse. "Victoria Ashford, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, racketeering, tax evasion, and human trafficking." Human trafficking. The words hit her like a physical blow because they were technically accurate. What Victoria had done, threatening workers with deportation while paying them below minimum wage, confiscating their identification papers, forcing them to work without breaks, met the federal definition of trafficking. She had believed herself clever and above the law, but the law had finally arrived to correct her. By 6:13 a.m., the footage was playing on every news channel in the country. Wealthy socialite Victoria Ashford, the woman whose face had graced the society pages of New York Magazine, the philanthropist who served on museum boards and hosted charity galas, being led from her penthouse in handcuffs while rain streamed down her face and cameras flashed like lightning. The headline on NY1 read simply, "Museum trustee arrested in labor trafficking ring." By 7:15 a.m., her lawyer was calling Lucian Ross's lawyer, begging, pleading, offering money, offering anything. The response came back in a single sentence spoken in a voice like ice, too quick, too easy, too merciful. She chose to prey on a woman who saved a child. She chose this. At 9:08 a.m., in a small government office in Lower Manhattan, Allara Voss sat in a plastic chair across from a caseworker named Ms. Patterson, and the woman kept shuffling through papers with an expression that cycled between confusion and suspicion. Her hands trembled as she reviewed the documents that Micah had delivered to the office 40 minutes earlier. Legal address, 1 Manhattan Plaza, apartment 34B, New York, New York, 10001. Lease, 12 months, rent paid in full. Monthly income, $10,000. Employment, consulting position, Mount Sinai Hospital, benefits included, health insurance activated. And then the letter from the hospital's billing department, the surgical procedure for Micah Voss has been fully funded by an anonymous donor. Total cost, $300,000. Surgery is scheduled for next Thursday at 8 a.m. Ms. Patterson looked up from the papers, her eye searching Allara's face for some explanation. Your circumstances appear to have changed significantly in the last 48 hours, she said carefully. These documents look legitimate, but I have to ask, where did this support come from? Allara did not know what to say. She opened her mouth and closed it again. The truth was that she did not fully understand what had happened. She only knew that Marco had appeared at her hospital room at dawn with an envelope containing keys, lease papers, and job contracts, and he had said simply, "Lucian has taken care of everything. The custody hearing is cancelled. You need to sign these." "I don't understand," Allara whispered. "Why would he do this? What does he want from me?" Marco had looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. "Perhaps," he said, "he wants nothing from you. Perhaps he wants only to give. There is a difference, you know, between the men who take and the men who build. I have watched Lucian Rossi for 15 years. I have never seen him build anything for anyone. Until now." Miss Patterson set the papers down and folded her hands. "Based on these documents, there is no legal basis for removing your son from your custody. In fact, it appears you are providing him with excellent care and support. The custody hearing is cancelled. Your case is closed." Allara felt something inside her chest crack open and spill out. She did not cry. She had learned long ago that crying was a luxury she could not afford. Instead, she sat very still, holding the papers that changed everything, and thought about a man she barely knew who had just rebuilt her life. Meanwhile, in a black SUV parked outside the courthouse where the hearing would not now take place, Marco received a call from Nino. "It's done," Nino said simply. Both of them booked. Both of them looking at federal time. Both of them going to spend the next 40 years understanding what they did. Marco smiled. It was a small, cold smile. The kind of smile that men like him wore when they had just watched justice move in directions the powerful had not expected. He ended the call and drove toward the hospital where Lucian was waiting, where Allara was just beginning to understand that her life had pivoted on the axis of a single act of mercy from a stranger who turned out to be anything but strange, anything but powerless, anything but unable to change everything. 3 months had passed since the morning Allara Voss walked into the hospital and held her son's hand as the surgeon explained what would happen inside the operating room. The heart valve, the one that had been failing since birth, the one that made her lie awake at night listening to his breathing, counting the steady beats like a prayer, would be replaced. The surgery would last 8 hours and 15 minutes. The cost was $300,000. Without it, her boy had 10 days. Maybe less. She had not cried then. She had learned long ago that crying was a luxury she could not afford. Now, in the fluorescent stillness of the recovery room, tears ran down her face like rain on a window that had been closed too long. Her son Micah lay sleeping in the hospital bed, his small chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of a heart that would now carry him into a future. A future. She had not dared imagine such a thing until the surgeon emerged and said the word, perfect. Allara reached out and touched his hand, careful not to disturb the fall line, and felt the pulse beneath his skin, strong, steady, alive. Behind her, a shadow moved in the doorway. Lucian Rossi stood there in a charcoal suit that cost more than everything she had owned 6 months ago, his dark eyes watching her with an intensity that still made her breath catch. Beside him stood young Micah, his son, a boy with the same sharp features and the same way of observing the world like he was calculating its measure. The two Micahs. The boy she had saved in an underground room that smelled of cigar smoke and desperation, and the boy she had carried in her body and fought for with every atom of her being. "He is going to be fine," Lucian said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath. "He is going to live," Allara whispered, and saying it aloud made it real in a way that medical reports and surgical success rates could never quite accomplish. Young Micah stepped forward and set something on the bedside table, a drawing, crayon colors on white paper. Blues and greens and yellows. "For when he wakes up," the boy said quietly. "Colors for happy days." Allara looked at the drawing. She did not know when she had started to cry harder. Perhaps it was the moment a child who had every reason to be selfish chose instead to think of another child's happiness. Perhaps it was the realization that her son would grow up in a world where such kindness existed. Perhaps it was simply the weight of survival, finally setting down. Lucian moved closer, and she felt his hand settle on her shoulder, steady, grounding, real. "You did this," he said softly. "You saved him. Just like you saved my son." 2 days earlier, in Lucian's penthouse office on the 42nd floor of a building that overlooked all of Manhattan like a throne surveying a kingdom, she had asked him the question that had burned in her chest since the moment the eviction notice disappeared, since the moment the surgery was approved, since the moment her entire life transformed in ways she still could not fully comprehend. Why, she had asked, holding the papers that certified her custody, her job, her apartment. All of it paid for. All of it secured. The apartment, the job, the surgery money, $300,000, you paid for everything. Why would you do this? I saved your son. I asked for nothing. I expected nothing. Lucian had stood at the window, his back to her, and the rain was falling against the glass like fingers tapping out a message in a language she almost understood. My father was murdered when I was 17, he had said finally. His voice did not shake. Men like him did not allow their voices to shake. But something in the way he held his shoulders, the way his hand pressed against the window glass, told her that every word cost him something. Rival family. Bullets in the back. I was hiding because I was too weak to stop it, too young to understand that weakness and survival are not the same thing. He turned then, and his face was raw with something she had never seen in a man who controlled an empire, who commanded loyalty through fear and respect in equal measure. I built everything on vengeance, he continued. On control. On making sure I was never helpless again. Then my son was bleeding, and I could not move. I was on my knees, useless, and you, a woman with $2 in her pocket, a woman the world had already discarded, you saved him. You made me realize that all my power meant nothing when it mattered most. She had stepped closer to him then, close enough to see the scar that ran from his left eye to his cheekbone, close enough to see that his hands were trembling. I did not save him for a reward, she had whispered. I know, he had said. That is why it matters. That night, Allara had told him about the bridge. About the rain, thick and cold and suffocating. About how close she had come to giving up, how the weight of everything, the debt, the eviction notice with its red ink deadlines, the surgery that cost more than any prayer could afford, a son who was dying and a mother who could do nothing but watch, had nearly broken her completely. She had stood on that bridge at 2 in the morning and thought about how much easier it would be to simply let go. "My son's surgery money came through the same night you saved him," Lucian had said, understanding without her having to explain. $15 million transferred from the Rossi Foundation to a hospital account, marked down as a grant for low-income cardiac patients. "But you were the only one who ever received it." She had looked at him then, really looked at him, and understood that they were bound together not by passion or attraction or the kind of love that burns bright and fast. They were bound by shared darkness, by the moments they each stood on the edge and chose to fight instead of falling. Two people who knew what it meant to lose everything and claw their way back. Meanwhile, across the city, the fallout had already begun. The news had spread like fire through dry kindling, first the arrest of Harold Brennan, her former manager, who had stolen her wages and threatened her with deportation every time she asked for what was owed. The video of his arrest played on every channel, a man in his 50s, grey-faced and trembling, being led away by federal agents while his lawyer screamed about injustice and false accusations. Then came Victoria Ashford's perp walk, and it became a phenomenon. The woman who had orchestrated the custody investigation, who had coordinated with Brennan to build a case against Allara, who had smiled while reviewing documents that would have taken her son away, Victoria moved through the courthouse in an expensive dress that no longer protected her, her face no longer the mask of a respectable philanthropist but something hollow and desperate. The photograph circulated through social media within hours. By evening, 17 million people had seen them. The federal prosecutors held a press conference announcing a massive labor exploitation investigation spanning 3 years and 17 different businesses. Workers began to come forward, dozens of them, then hundreds, all connected to Brennan and Victoria's operations. All of them stolen from, threatened, broken. All of them suddenly discovering that someone had been building a case against their exploiters, one conversation at a time, one piece of evidence methodically collected and organized. Micah brought Lucian the final report 3 weeks after Micah's surgery. The lieutenant stood in the office with the quiet bearing of a man who had witnessed impossible things and was no longer surprised by what the world could do when it decided to change. "Both of them booked," Micah said simply. "Both looking at federal time. Harold is looking at 40 years on the wage theft charges alone. Victoria is facing 60. They will spend the rest of their natural lives in prison understanding what they did." Lucian nodded, but his eyes were not on Marco. They were on Allara, who sat in the corner of his office holding a document that proved her son was healthy, her future was secure, her life had pivoted on the axis of a single act of mercy. "The underground room," Allara said suddenly, looking up. "The poker room where I found your son. What will happen to it?" Lucian was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled, a real smile, not the cold expression of a man calculating advantage but something genuine that changed the shape of his entire face. "I have been thinking about that," he said. "A community center, perhaps. A place where people who have nothing can learn how to build something. Job training. Literacy programs. A place where the invisible become visible again." She had wept then, quietly, while Marco watched with an expression he could not quite hide, the look of a man who, after 15 years of loyalty, had finally seen his boss become human. 3 months later, on a morning when the leaves were turning gold and the city smelled like possibility instead of desperation, Allara stood in the exact spot where she had knelt beside a bleeding child and chose to act instead of freeze. The underground room had transformed completely. The green felt tables were gone, replaced with desks for job training. The cigar smoke had been replaced by the smell of fresh paint. Armed guards had given way to social workers and teachers and mentors who understood that sometimes the most dangerous people in the world are those who refuse to see the value in others. She held a ribbon that would cut the ribbon at the official opening, the Micah Rossi Community Center, named after a boy who had been saved, and for the people who would be saved by what this place would become. Lucian stood beside her, and his son stood on his other side, both Micahs now, both alive because someone chose mercy when the world demanded vengeance. You could have killed them, Allara said quietly, speaking of Harold and Victoria, of the men who had nearly destroyed her. It would have been easier. Too easy, Lucian replied. Too merciful. Prison is justice. Death would have been an escape. The ribbon fell away, and people began to pour into the center, people like Allara had been, people with nothing, people the world had decided did not matter. They looked around at the desks, the computers, the training programs, and something shifted in their eyes. Recognition, perhaps. Or hope. Her son Micah ran past them, his health restored, his future secured, his heart beating strong and steady. He was chasing young Micah Rossi, both boys laughing with the pure joy of children who had learned that life could offer surprises, that kindness could exist in the most unexpected places, that the people we save sometimes save us right back. Allara thought about the woman she had been, the woman with $2 in her pocket, sleeping in a Honda, counting the hours until her son's heart would fail. She thought about the bridge, about how close she had come to letting go. She thought about Lucian's hand on her shoulder, and about mercy, and about how the most powerful transformations happen when someone sees you when you are invisible. Real strength is not found in never falling. Real strength is found in always standing back up. If this story moved you, like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe because tomorrow's story will remind you that sometimes the most unexpected people become the ones who change everything. Comment below, what would you have done in Allara's position? What would you have done if you were Lucian? We will see you in the next one.